There are moments in life when you expect to be surprised, and then there are moments that make you question whether you've somehow stepped into someone else's reality. The day I drove back to my island after nearly 4 years away, I wasn't expecting much more than overgrown trees, a weathered dock, and maybe a long weekend of cleaning up. Instead, I found a guarded entrance, perfectly paved roads, luxury homes with fresh landscaping, and a stone monument at the front that proudly welcomed visitors to something called Cedar Point Estates. The security guard looked at me like I had wandered into the wrong neighborhood, and honestly, standing there in my old jeans and faded work jacket after 8 hours of driving, I probably looked like I had. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 59 years old. I spent most of my career managing investment portfolios in Minneapolis, and for almost 30 years I built my life around one simple rule: buy things everyone else overlooks. Back in 2017, while everyone chased beachfront condos and mountain cabins, I bought a forgotten 36-acre island off the coast of Washington. People thought I was crazy. My own brother laughed and asked if I planned on becoming a pirate. The island wasn't pretty back then. It had no electricity, no fresh water system, no roads worth driving on, and the dock looked like it had survived 3 hurricanes and given up halfway through the 4th. But I didn't buy it for what it was. I bought it because of what it could become one day. Over the next 18 months, I poured nearly $1.5 million into it. Engineers built a small bridge connecting it to the mainland. Utility crews ran electrical service under permits that took months to obtain. Contractors drilled 2 deep wells. Surveyors mapped every inch of the property, and I made sure every single document was properly recorded with the county. I wasn't cutting corners. I knew enough about real estate to understand that paperwork matters more than concrete. You can rebuild a dock. Rebuilding ownership is another story entirely. The funny thing is, after finishing all that work, I barely had time to enjoy it. In early 2020, my company offered me a position overseeing several international acquisitions in London. It was supposed to last maybe 18 months. Then the market shifted, projects expanded, and one assignment became another. Before I knew it, almost 4 years had passed. Every now and then, I'd look through photos of the island on my phone, imagining quiet mornings drinking coffee by the water after retirement. I paid my property taxes every year without fail, renewed my insurance, kept every document organized in digital folders, and assumed everything was exactly as I had left it. Looking back now, assumptions can be expensive. The drive toward the island felt familiar until it suddenly didn't. About half a mile before the bridge, I noticed new landscaping, decorative streetlights, and signs advertising waterfront luxury living. I remember smiling because I thought someone must have developed land nearby. Then I crossed the bridge, my bridge, and everything inside me went completely silent. There were houses everywhere, not cabins, not temporary structures. Beautiful custom-built homes with expensive SUVs parked in driveways, children riding bicycles, couples walking dogs, flowers blooming around freshly painted mailboxes, and people living perfectly normal lives on land I knew better than my own backyard. For a second, I honestly wondered if I'd somehow driven onto the wrong island. Then I spotted the old oak tree I'd refused to cut down during construction. It was still there, standing exactly where I remembered. That was when my stomach dropped. I pulled over and just sat there gripping the steering wheel. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe the county made some mistake. Maybe I missed a legal notice while overseas. Maybe someone had leased part of the property through an administrative error. My brain was desperately searching for any explanation that made more sense than the one sitting right in front of me. Eventually, I drove farther in until I reached a beautiful stone clubhouse overlooking the marina. A large sign listed community rules and proudly welcomed residents to Cedar Point Estates. Sitting beneath it was a polished office with floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Through those windows, I could see a man in an expensive navy blazer laughing with what looked like prospective buyers. I parked across the street and watched for a minute. People walked past me without a second glance. Nobody recognized me because nobody had ever met me. As far as they were concerned, I was just another older guy in worn-out clothes wandering into a wealthy neighborhood. I decided not to tell anyone who I was. Not yet. Years working in finance had taught me something valuable. People reveal far more when they underestimate you. I walked into the sales office, and before I even reached the receptionist, the man in the blazer looked up from his desk, scanned me from head to toe, and smiled the kind of smile that isn't friendly at all. "Can I help you?" he asked. I was hoping to ask a few questions about the community, I replied. He leaned back in his chair, Homes start around 700,000. Just wanted to save you some time before you get your hopes up. The receptionist laughed quietly without looking at me. I smiled anyway. Actually, I was curious about the property itself. Who originally owned the island? He raised an eyebrow. Why would that matter? Just interested in the history. He chuckled. History doesn't buy houses, sir. Then he folded his hands together and added, if you're looking for affordable housing, you're probably on the wrong side of the bridge. I remember standing there for another second, looking around at the sales brochures spread across his desk, every single one advertising land that, according to every document sitting in my safe back home, still belonged to me. I asked one final question. Would it be possible to see the recorded ownership documents? This time, he didn't even bother hiding his irritation. Listen, he said, we don't hand confidential paperwork to random people who walk in wearing clothes from a yard sale. If you're not buying, you're wasting everyone's time. I nodded slowly, thanked him for his time, and walked back outside. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tell him that every inch of ground beneath his office legally belonged to me. I simply got into my truck, started the engine, and drove straight toward the office of the only real estate attorney I'd trusted for nearly 20 years. As I pulled into his parking lot, one thought kept repeating in my head over and over. If my paperwork says what I think it says, someone has just made the biggest real estate mistake I've ever seen. My attorney, Richard Lawson, had known me long enough to recognize the difference between a normal business problem and the kind of silence that meant something had gone terribly wrong. He didn't ask many questions when I walked into his office carrying the weathered leather binder that held every original document from the island purchase. He simply cleared a corner of his conference table and said, let's see what we're dealing with. For the next 2 hours, neither of us spoke very much. He spread out the original warranty deed, the county survey, bridge permits, utility easements, tax receipts, engineering reports, and every filing that had been recorded before I left the country. Then he logged into the county database and started comparing everything line by line. Every few minutes he'd stop, rub his chin, then keep reading. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in 20 years. Dan, he said quietly, you never sold this property. I know. You never transferred it. I know. There aren't any recorded easements beyond the utility access you approved. I nodded. Keep going. He took a deep breath. As far as the county is concerned, you still own the entire island. I felt relief for about 3 seconds before the obvious question hit me. Then how are 28 families living there? Richard turned his monitor toward me. Because somebody created an entirely separate paper trail that shouldn't exist. Over the next hour, we uncovered a scheme that was almost impressive in its arrogance. A development company called Pacific Horizon Communities had appeared 2 years after I left for London. Somehow they had convinced investors, contractors, lenders, and eventually buyers that they possessed valid development rights. They had formed an HOA, hired architects, secured construction loans, built roads, installed landscaping, marketed luxury waterfront homes, and sold every single property without ever owning the land underneath them. Some documents reference fabricated agreements that didn't exist. Others simply ignored the original recorded deed altogether. Richard shook his head. I've handled real estate litigation for 35 years. I've never seen fraud on this scale. Can they fix it? I asked. He looked directly at me. No. Legally speaking, they built an entire neighborhood on someone else's front yard. That sentence stayed with me. Someone else's front yard? Mine. We filed suit the very next morning. Quiet title: fraud, civil conspiracy, trespass, unjust enrichment. Every legal theory Richard believed could survive judicial scrutiny went into that complaint. Every company involved was named: the HOA board, Pacific Horizon, their officers, their title company, even the marketing firm that continued advertising homes weeks before we filed. Then Richard did something I hadn't expected. He insisted that every homeowner receive formal notice. They're victims too, he said. The sooner they know the truth, the sooner they'll stop believing the developer can save them. 3 days later, the neighborhood exploded. It started with a process server knocking on front doors, then another, then another. By lunchtime, social media groups were flooded with confused residents posting photographs of court documents they barely understood. One woman wrote that there had to be some mistake because she'd paid cash for her retirement home. Another insisted her bank had verified the title before closing. A retired firefighter posted that he'd spent his life savings moving there because he wanted someplace peaceful for his grandchildren to visit. Reading those comments bothered me more than I expected. None of those people had stolen my island. They had trusted professionals who were supposed to protect them. Unfortunately, trust doesn't rewrite property law. The only people pretending nothing was wrong were the HOA leadership. 2 days after the lawsuits were filed, I drove back to the island, parked outside the clubhouse, and watched residents gather around Gregory Whitmore, the HOA president. He stood on the front steps wearing the same expensive blazer, smiling confidently while telling everyone this was just a nuisance lawsuit from a disgruntled outsider. I almost laughed hearing that. An outsider, on my own island. One resident finally asked him directly, "Do we actually own our homes?" Gregory answered without hesitation, "Absolutely. Our attorneys will have this dismissed in no time." That was the moment I decided to introduce myself. I walked toward the crowd slowly. Gregory noticed me immediately and rolled his eyes. "Well, look who's back." Several residents turned around, recognizing me as the man they'd seen walking through the sales office a few days earlier. I stopped a few feet away. "Good afternoon," I said calmly. Gregory crossed his arms. "Still shopping?" "No," I replied. "Just checking on my property." A few people chuckled, assuming I was joking. Gregory smirked. "Sir, I think it's time you move along." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a certified copy of the recorded deed Richard had prepared that morning. "Actually," I said, handing it to the nearest homeowner instead of Gregory, "I'd appreciate it if everyone took a look at the legal description." The older gentleman accepted it politely and began reading aloud. Halfway through, he stopped. His expression changed. "Wait," another resident leaned over his shoulder. "That's this island." Gregory stepped forward quickly. "Give me that." He scanned the first page, then the recording stamp, then the survey attached behind it. His face lost all color. For the first time since meeting him, he didn't have a sarcastic response ready. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. I smiled. "The county clerk's office. Same place you probably should have gone before selling 28 houses." Silence settled over the group. You could almost hear people mentally adding up mortgages, moving expenses, renovations, and years of savings. Then the questions started coming all at once. "What's happening? Is this real? Are we losing our homes?" Gregory tried interrupting everyone. "Please don't panic. Our attorneys." One woman cut him off. "Answer the question." Another man pointed at me. "Who are you?" I looked around at all of them before answering. "My name is Daniel Carter. I bought this island in 2017. I never sold it." You could literally watch the realization spread across their faces like a wave. Shock, confusion, fear. One couple stepped away from Gregory altogether. Another resident started crying. Someone else immediately called their real estate agent, who apparently wasn't answering anymore. Gregory finally found his voice. "You're lying." "Am I?" I asked. "Then let's let the judge decide." Local media somehow picked up the story before sunset. By the next morning, news helicopters were circling overhead, while reporters lined the bridge, interviewing anyone willing to talk. Headlines called it one of the largest real estate fraud investigations in state history. Financial analysts estimated nearly $20 million in home sales were now tied to disputed ownership. National outlets started requesting interviews. Meanwhile, Gregory disappeared. His phone went straight to voicemail. HOA board members suddenly claimed they had relied entirely on Pacific Horizon. Pacific Horizon blamed outside consultants. Consultants blamed title insurance companies. Everyone was searching for someone else to stand in front of the train that was already arriving. Discovery during the lawsuit made things even worse. Internal emails showed executives discussing unresolved ownership questions months before construction even began. Someone had actually written, "By the time anyone notices, the community will be complete." Reading that sentence made my blood boil. They hadn't made a mistake. They had gambled that no one would challenge them quickly enough. They gambled with millions of dollars, and with 28 families who honestly believed they'd found their dream homes. Richard warned me to stay patient. "Don't celebrate yet," he kept saying. "Facts win lawsuits. Emotions don't." So I stayed quiet while evidence piled higher every week. Surveyors confirmed property boundaries. Engineers verified infrastructure locations. County officials testified every recorded ownership document still traced directly back to me without interruption. Even the original bridge permits listed me personally as the property owner. Every new piece of evidence made the defense's position weaker. Then, 3 months after filing the lawsuit, The court scheduled an expedited hearing because there were simply too many people affected to allow the uncertainty to continue. Walking into that courthouse felt strangely peaceful. Gregory sat across the aisle looking 10 years older than when I'd first met him. The expensive confidence was gone, replaced by exhausted eyes and wrinkled suits. He avoided looking at me entirely. His attorneys carried stacks of binders. But even from across the room I could tell they already knew what was coming. Richard leaned toward me just before proceedings began and whispered, "No matter what happens today, you kept every piece of paper." I nodded. Funny how something as boring as organized paperwork can become the difference between losing everything and proving the truth. As the judge entered the courtroom and everyone rose to their feet, I had no idea that before the afternoon was over, 28 homeowners would discover who really owned every house they were living in. And Gregory Whitmore would learn that arrogance is an expensive substitute for due diligence. The hearing itself moved much faster than anyone expected. Richard didn't need dramatic speeches because the documents spoke for themselves. Every deed, every survey, every tax receipt, every permit led to the same conclusion. I had legally purchased the island years earlier, never sold it, never transferred it, and had continued paying taxes the entire time I was overseas. The defense tried arguing that the homeowners had acted in good faith, and the judge agreed they were innocent buyers. But he also made one thing perfectly clear: no one can sell property they never owned. That single sentence ended the case. The court confirmed that I remained the legal owner of the entire island, including every home, every road, every dock, and every common area. Pacific Horizon and the people behind the development were held responsible for fraud, while Gregory Whitmore sat quietly staring at the table, unable to say a word. The same man who had laughed at my old clothes couldn't even look me in the eye anymore. What surprised everyone came next. Instead of forcing 28 families out of their homes, I asked to speak with them outside the courthouse. They weren't the people who had lied to me. They were victims too. A retired firefighter stepped forward and said, "Mr. Carter, if we have to leave, we'll leave. We know this isn't your fault." Hearing that changed everything. I told them I wasn't interested in ruining innocent families just to prove I had won. Instead, I offered every homeowner a long-term lease at a reasonable monthly rate. I would maintain the roads, bridge, utilities, and shared infrastructure, while they would continue taking care of their homes. Every agreement would be legally recorded so nothing like this could ever happen again. Within a week, all 28 families signed. They knew the developer was bankrupt. Gregory had disappeared, and there was no one else left to turn to. Over time, the neighborhood slowly became what it should have been from the beginning. The HOA disappeared, replaced by simple property management focused on maintaining the community instead of controlling it. Neighbors who barely knew me before now waved whenever I drove through the island. Some even joked that I should never stop wearing those old jeans because they turned out to be worth millions. Looking back, I don't think the biggest lesson was about real estate. It was about how quickly people judge someone based on appearances. Gregory saw an older man in worn clothes and assumed I didn't belong there. He never imagined he was standing on land that legally belonged to me. That's a mistake he'll probably remember for the rest of his life. As for me, every month, I still receive rent from the same neighborhood that once tried to sell me my own island. And every time I walk across that bridge, I'm reminded that paperwork isn't exciting, until the day it becomes the only thing standing between you and losing everything. Now I'd love to hear your opinion. If you had been in my position, would you have let those families stay, or would you have asked everyone to leave and started over? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who thinks appearances tell the whole story.